And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Ben Gordon, lifelong paranormal experiencer from a multi-generational UFO abduction family who's also had a near-death experience. Ben, thanks for joining me and welcome.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
Well, let's start from the beginning. And what age were you when you became aware that you were different from the other kids?
It took a minute to realize that I wasn't quite like many of my classmates because I thought you assume that others around you have the same abilities that you have until they tell you they don't. And so, for example, I had the ability to, for instance, if my mom said, okay, that's enough TV for you, Mr. Man, go to your room, I would happily oblige because I could replay, cast on a wall, what I just watched verbatim. So if it was Bugs Bunny, if it was Wizard of Oz, I could just rewatch it like photographic memory, and I could actually project it from my eyes. I was able to know when my parents were upset before they gave any visual clues or any verbal clues. My parents realized there was something special, or a little bit different with me. I feel personally that the word empath these days gets so overused, but I literally did not possess the ability to shield myself from the feelings of others when I was a child. I kind of knew what they were going to say before they said it. What's more, before I had any access to the subject of UFOs in any variety whatsoever, I was dreaming, I would say almost nightly, of waiting for the UFOs, but I didn't have a word for them. I would usually be sitting somewhere in a park in kind of a natural setting. And the prevailing feeling I would have would be like, it's happening again. They're coming again. I was either alone or with my father. So we're talking 4 years old. That puts 1974. My very first access to UFOs in popular culture would have been Close Encounters, which I believe was 77 or something like that. So that, looking back in retrospect, became very important to me to realize that I just didn't, how there's the sort of parroting of people's experiences, and we all tend to embellish, or there was no phone game with this. I was dreaming of these things coming from the sky and many times taking me into to places without any of the words to associate with them.
So you knew that somebody was coming.
Yes.
What did that mean to you? Somebody was coming. If you didn't put it together at that age that it was ETs.
Well, I knew that in waking life that the physical world had all kinds of rules. I could hurt myself. I could bump into things. I could get scolded for taking a cookie that wasn't mine. Everything was in its like little right place. I'm sure that an airplane had been pointed out to me as a child, and because every kid is interested in anything going on up in the sky. However, the way these things moved and the fleet-like nature, it was never one, it was never two, it was an armada of these things. And they just moved differently than anything else that I had seen at my young age at that time. I didn't know what they were, but the feeling I had behind them was like, oh no, they're back. I was quite terrified. So I'm absolutely sure that I attempted at the very least to verbalize these things to my parents. And my parents were strange birds too. They were very interested. Coming off the 60s, they were into Carlos Castaneda. They did TM meditation. They were into this thing called the Urantia book later on. I'm not sure if you know about that. It got really deep.
Well, I've had a couple podcasts on the Urantia book, actually, just recently.
Yeah, there was a Christmas where my father gave us all our own copy.
Wow.
And it's a daunting book. I mean, it's impressive. I don't know that much about it, but the point being is that my parents were very, very, very open to this and involved in these types of ways of thinking.
Well, at what age were you when you finally put it all together that they were ETs?
The young child thing, went into first, second, third grade where I always felt very, very different. And after a certain period of time, I began to assimilate because it was sort of, you know how it is. It's like sink or swim in school. And you could choose to be the little weirdo for your entire school experience. But at a certain point, I had to integrate a little bit. So I kind of put some of that, I kind of divided my world in two and used humor to make friends and things like that. And became more interested in things like music, playing guitar, girls, and things like that as I advanced. It wasn't until my early 20s where I started having bona fide, intense, close sightings. Now, prior to my first sighting, which I'll describe in a minute here, my youngest brother was coming home, I would say, once or twice a month with a sighting. Now, he was 5 or 6 years old, and the regularity with which these seemed to happen made me a little skeptical, but also a little jealous. By that point, I had read Whitley Strieber and things like this. I had read these abduction stuff, and I'm like, when do I get to? My little brother seeing all this stuff, and so I took him, I guess, with a grain of salt. Um, one summer, my parents and he and one other sibling went to like a UFO convention that was in the middle of Wisconsin somewhere. They came back and they were like, wow, that was absolutely out of this world. They kind of got a kick out of some of the people there, and they're like, oh, and this film crew got real interested in my little brother, and they interviewed him, and they were doing this documentary. Well, I was like, well, is it legit? Are they going to air this thing? And they're like, they were with TBS, which was kind of like a big cable channel back then. So I was like, okay. And they said, like, in about a year, this thing's going to air. Well, in the meantime, I and another brother, there's six of us in my family, six siblings, had a close encounter that to this day, this was 1993 or 94. I don't believe I've heard another encounter where the object got as close as this did. So basically, my brother and I were running late for a gig. We were playing in the next town over from here, which is 30 minutes away. The rest of the band had already departed. They're like, hurry up, guys. You're always late. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So we get going a little later. I noticed my brother's driving impossibly bright lights to my left, on the left side of the highway. They were just too bright to be anything I've ever seen before. I point them out to my brother. He says, holy cow, like, yeah, what is this? And no sooner had we both locked onto it that it had moved and had come so close to the car that we came to a stop. A couple cars ahead of us came to a stop. And this gigantic triangle shaped craft, the size of a football field, floated silently right over the top of the car, a little bit ahead. It was so close to us that my brother could have hit it with a baseball because he's a baseball player. I could have come close. It just slowly and silently. My torso's out the window at this point, and I'm laughing hysterically because I can't process something that large not making any sound. Then it goes over to the other side of the highway, pivots like this, and lowers itself to the ground and hovers about 20 feet off the ground. We can't process what this thing is. So we sit there, we stare at it, and I'm like, remember, we're late. We have to drive away. We're gonna be. So we hurriedly make it to the gig. But before we get to the gig, we're just talking a mile a minute to each other, like, what was that? That was a UFO. By the way, Jeff, it wasn't completely dark. It was just getting dark to the point where a shadow was being cast on the ground. This wasn't a light in the sky. This thing was tangible right there. So we get another 5 minutes down the road, and my brother says, "See, that's an airplane. That's how an airplane moves." And I'm looking, and he just focuses on driving, and then I realize it's the exact same thing. It was back on the other side of the highway, but it was much further away. And I go, "No, that's not an airplane. That's the same thing making another on purpose turn in front of us." And it felt the entire time it felt like that thing was meant to be seen by us. So we get to the gig, we tell everybody that's cool. We wake up our parents when we get back from the gig. They're like, wow, that's really neat, right? Well, fast forward a couple months later, that was November. It's Christmas Eve. Me and the same brother are running late again for grandma's Christmas Eve dinner. We'll catch up with you guys. They're like, yeah, hurry up. Don't be too late. Okay. My brother and I get into the car and we get 2 blocks away from our family home. And there it is again, hovering over the park right by our house. And we're like, okay, this time we're following it. So that's what we did. It started making its way from the east side of Green Bay, where we're from, to the west side. We went over the bridge. We followed it. It went into a giant field that was surrounding this paper mill. Green Bay is a paper mill town. And it was hovering above the paper mill. So we got out of the car and we were this close to scaling the fence because you need security buzzed in to get into this place. And we were like halfway up the fence. I'm like, dude, no, I'm not getting arrested for this. Plus we're late, remember? So we get to grandma's. It's a big full house with cousins and aunts and uncles and my grandma. And we announced immediately what we had just seen. Well, the cousins who are like very close in age with us and pretty close cousins are kind of laughing and rolling their eyes and making like hand gestures of like, oh, like stuff like that. And so they're not taking it seriously, but we look over and my father, my grandma, and his brother and sister are all talking very seriously. And they were like, come here, tell us what you saw. Well, we tell them again. And my dad mentions that, well, the dentist cut a piece of my ear out. And his brother goes, yeah, why did the dentist cut a piece of our ear out? And I said, guys, dentists they don't cut your ears. This sounds like a screen memory. Do you know what a screen memory is? And they're like, no, what's that? And I go, well, I read about it in some of these alien abduction books where to cover up what happened to you, they put sort of a screen to kind of, shield it so you don't consciously remember. Well, then my grandma starts speaking up. So we've got my generation, me and my brother, then my father and his siblings. And now my grandmother says, well, Jack, my grandfather who had passed away, complained of being followed by these ships on the way home from the cabin all the time. He was terrified. That's when I knew that this was not specific to me and my brother. Then a month or two after that, that TBS documentary aired. So I had a little party. I invited all the family over. I wheeled one of those old tube TVs out on the deck because it's like the 90s. And we watch. And my little brother's there in this documentary, and he describes the exact same craft. And I said, that's what Josh and I saw. And he got tears in his eyes. And he said, I was trying to tell you and you wouldn't listen. And I started crying a little bit because I was like, I probably didn't, because it might have been his 100th UFO story. And I'm like, oh, that's cute. So now we have 3 siblings in the same family who've had very, very close encounters with this triangular shaped craft that some people call a TR3B. It looks like that's what it was, but I don't know. It looked and felt otherworldly. That's for sure.
Did the contact continue after that?
Yes, in my case, I began after those, if you want to call them TR3Bs, triangles, whatever. The black helicopters began appearing in my world on a regular basis. Now, I've heard people say that that is a common cloaking mechanism that UFOs will use. I can't say for certain that that is the case, but what I can say is that much in the same way that the triangle craft came super close to our car, basically casting a shadow. I was driving to Sedona for a winter, to go move there for the winter, driving through New Mexico, and a black helicopter flew from the left side of the highway over to the right that came so close to the front of my car that I put on the brakes in such an exaggerated fashion that I almost lost control. And it went over to the side of the highway and kind of did some circles. It was the single most reckless thing I've ever seen an aircraft do in my entire life. And once again, it felt like that was meant for me to notice and to see. There was another instance in Philadelphia, where I lived in Philadelphia for a while. 3 black helicopters whizzed by 6 in the morning, right barely over the housetop, scaring the bejesus out of me. Again, it just began to feel like these were meant to be noticed by me. There's a certain mathematical reality to things where it's way over the law of averages here. There were probably 3 or 4 more of those instances. And then the UFO sightings were, especially when I was in Wisconsin, were once a month. All from classic UFO, like flying saucer, silver disc type sightings, um, fast moving cylindrical things that would just go right by me. When I was at this park that I used to read at, it seemed like every few weeks there were sightings and the dreams continued. And I had sort of a abduction themed things were slipping through into my dreamscape of like, oh wow, I am being there's some connection. This isn't just physical sightings out in the world. There's some other stuff probably happening to me, but I didn't recover a lot of that until I did some regression stuff.
Did you ever experience lost time?
Yes, many times. We were so I've always been a driver across the country. I can drive long distances. I've lived in probably 20 cities. I'm ripe for the plucking, if you will. And there have been many, many times where an hour and a half or 2 hours have disappeared. But these paranormal things were occurring with such regularity at certain periods of my life that I became somewhat desensitized. Like I would catch myself going, "Oh, I probably got abducted." It's a strange thing to become desensitized to.
Why do you think these UFOs have been contacting you and your family? What have you put together?
A number of things come to mind that are best guesses. And a lot of this leans on, and in other cases relies on other people's testimony because we really want to hear what other people are going through. Um, have you heard people speak of this notion that they know who you are when you come into this realm? That there are entities and forces out there that sort of know the energy, signature energy footprint of a soul.
Some people talk about that they made pre-birth agreements, if that's what you're speaking of.
I'm speaking of something potentially a teeny bit darker than that, whereby uh, um, a person who incarnates on Earth might have a certain energy signature. They may have all kinds of abilities, like I had when I was a child. And the way it's been explained to me and the way it felt to me throughout my entire life was that there were these forces, off world forces, that were moving things in my life to keep me off the course. And almost like that movie, which I didn't see until a couple of years ago, but The Adjustment Bureau makes a case for this type of thing. And I've heard the testimony of many other people who've had my experiences say that it really does feel like they don't want you to get too much influence. They don't want you to use your powers for good. And we have sort of a spiritual battle in that way. Another component could be the Rh negative blood type, of which I am. I have heard many people talk about that there's some subtle differences between people that have Rh negative and the other blood types. Why generationally? I don't know, but I've read statistically that Irish people are there's a high percentage of Irish people that are abductees. I don't know what that would be about Irish people, but yeah,
Are you aware if you have an implant or not?
I do.
Where?
Well, I have several. I have, so we'll get to the hospital thing. There's an anomaly in my frontal lobe that the notes literally say that doesn't look like a fat. It doesn't look like, there's almost like a grain of rice looking thing. So I believe there's a physical thing. I have I have an anomaly that happens to me that leads me to believe that it is this device here, which is everyone complains about ringing of some variety. I have tinnitus or tinnitus, which apparently that's how you say tinnitus. Tinnitus makes me feel British. I have tinnitus. So I'm used to the normal kind of ringing that a person has in their ring from being in rock bands, right? Like, but what happens to me is, do you know that sensation you get when you fall in your dream and you catch yourself? Or if you fall in real life, you miss a stair, your stomach kind of drops out. I get that precise feeling, but it's here, as if my head drops 2 stories. It's very disconcerting. Then my hearing goes out entirely, like no hearing, and then a 15-second tone in this ear. And I've had to protect myself, because I'm overly protective of myself because of all of the things. I'm very, very careful. I don't know whether to receive this. Is this benevolent or is this something dark? So I say, if this is has anything to do with love and helping and being a good person, I receive this message. If this has anything to do with stopping me from fulfilling my highest spiritual purpose, I reject this message. So that's how I've dealt with that. But it feels like an implant to me. I've also had energy people look at my energy body and say that, this has been like etheric blockages and things like that. But I'm pretty good at minding the store and getting those removed. I've become very disciplined. I don't miss a day without doing my clearings 3 times a day,
How often are you still in contact with them?
probably every single night. There are entities from, there are good, benevolent entities, far less dark entities. Um, but more of my contacts, I think, are parallel timelines that I'm on, that I've invited in. I purposely am trying to unify every branch of my soul back together so that I can keep things in a nicer space and become aware of other aspects of myself. So there are various entities that I on the regular will dream about. And I know when it's not a dream because my visual acuity is 1,000 times better than it is in normal life. I can zoom in. I can zoom in on anything and see down to the cellular level. That's usually when I know I'm in a different realm and it's a real experience.
Have you ever had face-to-face contact with an ET or any other being
Yes,
in waking life?
I believe so. I but I wish it were a cooler story. Um, it's not what I would have picked for myself, but I literally saw a person that had become a friend over the course of a couple of years, who I was beginning to have some doubts about. I began discovering some behaviors that seemed unethical, we'll just say. I saw this person shapeshift for maybe just a second and a half, but it was undeniable. And it was viewed in full sobriety. And this person that shapeshifted right in front of me, I mean, it had the characteristics of what people refer to as Draco reptilian. Um, the positive or the other alien interactions that I've had are all either in the astral or the dream state, but they definitely don't feel like regular dreams to me.
Let's fast forward in your life to your NDE. What happened with
Mhm.
that?
So there was a minor car accident, whereby when it was just my car, and I was fully conscious. Um, there was, there was a little bit of cutting on my face, not too bad. I was able to assess the rearview mirror. I went up to, my best guess is that I fell asleep going home. I was only a quarter mile from home. I was exhausted, but nothing, the car didn't seem too screwed up or anything. Well, an armada of EMT came and I kind of blacked out. And I, so there's two components to this. I received the second half of this NDE first. And then later I recovered the beginning of it and I was able to tie the whole thing together. So the next conscious memory I had after being not on the side of the road was trillions of points of light from every stretch of this galaxy. I was aware of each one of these at one time, all coming together back into the center of my body. And it was like the white light people talk about going to with volition. I came out of it. So these pixelated bits of points of light from every direction came and became that light and then burst through my body. And I realized I was in a hospital. Now, the circumstances surrounding this hospital, why I was there, are still very controversial. And there's some legal things in the background that sort of make it like necessary maybe not to mention certain aspects of this right now. There's people looking into what went on here. But long story short, I came back into my body with more energy than I've ever had in my entire life. I got out of the situation. I had a bit of a standoff, if you will, with staff, questioning what's going on. Why am I here? The last thing I remember is I was fully conscious on the side of the road. And after some wrangling with them, I was able to leave. But this feeling of energy that I had and clarity, I felt almost superhuman. I just felt energy coursing through me. I would later find out the amount of things going into my drips there over the course of hours, which would make it almost impossible to feel energy of any variety, right? So when I got a regression to look deep into what happened, I still didn't know this was an NDE. I didn't know. When I got my regression, and it was a 5-hour regression, we touched on some other things, and then we went to this event. Now I was able to recover that my body shut down. And I became those pixelated points of light that I referenced earlier coming back, but leaving me, leaving the center of my body, almost like a super tight spray bottle where it mist like that. So the entire essence of my being went from this point all the way to everywhere. So now I had the two halves of this story through that regression. I had made a wish in the weeks and months to return to source if anything ever happened to me. And that's what that felt like. I had consciously over the years decided in my mind at that time that I did not wish to return as another incarnated soul. I did not need to see people in my life or have a life review because I was doing a recapitulation. I was going with a fine tooth comb over every deception I've led myself down my entire life. Oh my God, why did I lie about this? That was stupid and pointless. Apologizing to people in my life, making the ship as right as I possibly could, doing my own life review, if you will. So I had a friend die some years prior, and I always am the one who gets to meet with the deceased in my dreams. And it feels kind of bad because I have to tell their closest loved one that I was the one that got to see them. Well, this young lady who was hit by a car, who was a very close friend of mine, maybe 5, 6, 7 years prior. I met her in a dream, but it was real. And she explained to me exactly what going back to source was. I didn't know that terminology then, but that's when I became interested. I'm like, wait, you can just give up this identity game and having, I want to be me or a different me or a cooler me or a more exotic place to live. You can give all that up. And she said, yeah, I did. I gave it all up. So from that point on, I started reading and learning about everybody's different ideas about what happens after, and had sort of been preparing for this. And when I was able to put those two halves together, boy, it really felt like I became everything. And all of these individual pieces were aware of themselves, but of everything else. And then when I came back into my body, it reassembled. But there was no like, do you want to return to Earth or would you like to? It wasn't, it felt like I was doing the doing. It was a pure volition driven by my will. And at that very time, I also received, after much legal wrangling and a good lawyer, I got my real records from the situation. And right there in black ink was a doctor who was never mentioned on the first report. It's kind of illegal to leave stuff out of a hospital report. And he said in no uncertain terms that this is during the height of the health crisis that we were having. There's an entire floor dedicated to this situation. I'm on a different floor. He writes in his notes that he has to abandon that entire ward to come and stop critical organ failure, all system organ failure for me. Do I know why my organs failed? I don't. I can only assume that somebody may have screwed something up because I was wide awake before I went to the hospital. So it's still a mystery. I'm still slowly going through this. But the NDE, I was validated. I knew it was an NDE after that, after I went under for the 5 hours of regression. And then almost like this gift, it came in print like, wow, you did die. But what was interesting is when I started having entity battles while I got more serious with my spirituality and realized that I could move energy around and moved dark spirits out of people, I had many experiences that felt against my will, where I became pixelated, much like this NDE, where I would go. My out of body experiences through my life have never been me floating in my body. It's always been this disparate cascading into mist and becoming everything. So you can understand why it would be easy, at least on the onset, to sort of have those two experiences be nearly identical. It wasn't until I did the regression and then got the paper proof that I realized that all my organs stopped.
Did you flatline and they had to resuscitate you?
That part of the records is still missing.
Hmm.
I think somebody made a boo-boo, and I think that they were very happy that it didn't turn out really, really terrible. The temptation for people to try to get money from healthcare professionals who are mostly just trying to help people would be super disruptive. So my pursuit has been to, in my free time and with pro bono only lawyers, just people who care, is just try to see what happened. And the other part of me is just sort of like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter anymore because I'm alive. And that's kind of why I titled my book, I Keep Not Dying.
At some point in your life, you started being attacked by entities. Can you tell us about that and how you got out of it?
Certainly. In the summer, or the winter rather, of 2014, I decided to spend my time in Sarasota, Florida, because I had heard that it was a very deeply spiritual place, and it cost a little less than Sedona, which was beginning to price me out where I had been going previously. So I gave it a roll, and I was glad that I did because the energy there for me was perfect. My meditational work was really taking off. It took me a millisecond to get to another place in my mind. I felt like people were coming into my life that needed my help. I was happy to offer them the help. There was this beautiful symphony of helping people and just humbly advancing my abilities to just get to a place that felt right for me. And I had every intention at that moment and in those moments there that, this is a place that you should really set up because things are working out. Well, I don't know if you've heard the term, because I hadn't at this point, but alien love bite situations.
I haven't heard of that. What is it?
Okay, so unfortunately, it took me 2 years to learn about the situation, but a young woman came into my life, and women seemed to be the vector points by which I was thrown off my spiritual course. It's always been a weakness for me to, it's no fun being lonely. It's fun to be with pretty girls, all that stuff. Well, anyway, I had met one time this young lady that was incredibly bewitching and funny and all the things. And I noticed one day that she had liked every post I made on Facebook going back like 2 years. And I'm like, what? Did I make an impression on her? What is this? My boss in Milwaukee texts me and goes, hey, did you really take off? Did you hit it off with, I'm not going to say her name. Let's call her Sandra. Um, and I said, I don't know. We laughed a bunch, but I don't know. She goes, because she won't shut up about you. And I was like, whoa. And then it came into my mind that I'd been dreaming of this person. All the dreams, I'm like, whoa, I've been dreaming of her. So I messaged her and I said, hey, I don't recall giving you permission to come into my dreams every night. What are you doing? This is creepy, something like that. And she said, what? I don't recall giving you permission to come into my dreams. No joke. You are in my dreams every night. We are having some of the same dreams. We are meeting on this astral level. Well, what does a guy like me think then? Well, this is destiny wrapped in fate. This is my soulmate. Why else would this wonderful thing be happening to me? So I immediately abandoned the idea of staying in Sarasota as I had made up my mind to do. And I'm like, I'm moving back to Milwaukee to be with this girl. Well, things were not as they seemed. I moved back. She started exhibiting very strange behaviors, beginning with little white lies, and then moving into more impossible and pointless lies. And one night, after we went to a concert, we fell asleep, and in the middle of the night, I woke up, and I saw a black stingray-looking thing fly out of her and out my window as she woke up and screamed. It was clear as day. And she's like, I just had the worst dream. And I didn't dare tell her what I saw. I was like, tell me about the dream. And she's like, this thing was attacking me. It was in my body. I saw this thing with my eyes. So I'm like, oh no. I didn't have a word for this. I didn't have a name for this. I met with a neighbor 2 days later, and we're horsing around on her front porch. She's right 2 doors down. And she goes, dude, I had the worst experience the other night. And I said, what happened? He said, this black thing flew into my bedroom and was choking me out. And I'm like, whoa, that's weird. And I regret this so hard. I didn't tell her that I had seen the same thing because I felt responsible. This thing flew out of my girlfriend and went and attacked this other person 2 doors down. And I had already been fantasizing about integrating this new girl into this friend group. And I can't bring her into this group if she's got whatever. So that began a long series of incredible interruptions in my life that came through this girl. Now, I'm not blaming her for all of these things, but it took me months to figure out. I began getting physically injured on the regular. I cut things off with this girl because she had hidden a pretty terrible drinking problem. Like textbook, like you could make a after school special about the dangers of like it was like wow. I didn't know people could drink that way, like secretly and hiding it. So I cut things off with her, but it seemed that because these entities didn't have that direct access via her, they moved on to other things. And I started getting physically harmed. Now, one instance is a good sort of dove point to the NDE that I already explained. It was becoming customary where I would lose control of my body. I'd be maybe reading a book, and maybe I'd look up at my computer or something, and all the feeling would leave my feet and it would travel up my body. And I would either be brought to another realm, or I would lose function. I'd end up on the bed and I'd be like, and then the feeling would slowly come back. And I'm thinking, do I have a neurological issue? What is this? I ended up getting checked out, and they were like, no, there's nothing that would do that. One day I went downstairs from my apartment to smoke a cigarette, because back then I don't know why I did this, but I could never smoke more than a couple little drags. I put it out, started making my way back up the stairs, and this feeling happened again on my feet. Moved very quickly up my body. I desperately tried to hold onto the railing, and then the feeling went out of my arms, and I tipped over like this back onto the. Now my eyes only work, just my eyes, and I'm staring up at this mosquito-filled light, and I don't feel anything, but I can't move. And I'm like, am I paralyzed? Slowly, the feeling starts coming back into my body, bit by bit, from the toes first. But with that feeling, and I was happy, of course, to like, oh, I can feel my body now. The pain, there was this, the feeling of the wind getting kicked out of you permanently. So I waited a good hour. The feeling didn't go away. I walked to a walk-in clinic. The pain was, I wouldn't say it was excruciating, but it was disconcerting. It was like a big dull pain everywhere, right in the back. So the guy does I don't know if it was an x-ray. I think he just did an x-ray. He comes out and he goes, hey, I just called you an ambulance. It looks like you broke your back. So I don't want to get too deeply into this, but there were several physical type attacks. One of which, I was on a bicycle and I slowed down at a crosswalk, and two very white bread business briefcase type guys were walking in the crosswalk. And I got hit from the left, and I flew off my bike. And these guys looked at me and were like, what the heck just hit you? There's no cars. They saw me fly several feet, and I broke a rib, or I bruised a rib. I never checked it out, but it feels about the same. So these physical things began happening right after this girl. And I'm like, wow, does this have absolutely something's trying to throw me off my spiritual course and cause pain and discord and all this stuff. And it took me many, many months to finally find this book called Alien Love Bite that was written by, her name will come back to me, but it talks about how bright spiritual souls who can do real good on this planet are oftentimes set up in these destructive romantic relationships to throw them off course. So through that book, I learned the nature of what the entities were, which they're ancient, they're archons. The Nagamati texts speak of them. They're not particularly powerful if you know what they are and you know how to ward them off. If you don't know what they are, you could think that your life is ending. So when I finally realized what these things were, I was able to get rid of them and do a whole series of cleansings daily. And I've had a couple more run-ins with them, but by removing them from other people, they have not affected me. And I no longer have these daily interruptions in my life. Yeah.
Are you saying that the archons are manipulating your environment so that you would meet these women?
That was the implication and the premise of the book. And boy, oh boy, did it feel exactly like that.
What did you do to stop it?
Well, at first I burned a salary's worth of sage, which did absolutely nothing. I didn't know what to do. I mean, I ended up with a thing that I did, a verbal saying to cover the bases, which was something like, once again, I reiterate and reconfirm that I am free from contact, contract, influence, and interference from any and all dark, demonic, vampiric, or parasitic entities in all timelines, all realms, what we call the past, what we call the present, what we call the future, and in the void, I too am free from those who are inhabited by them and are intermediaries. And so I started doing that 2 or 3 times a day, in the morning, afternoon, and before bed. And they've never come back. The only time I had an interaction with them was because I was stupid and wasn't following my own advice, and I was drinking on the weekends and trying to be a city shaman or whatever, during the rest of the week. And basically what happened is I went to get an appetizer with a friend during the intermission of a jazz concert. We ran across the street, and this very, I guess, attractive younger woman began paying attention to me in the most gratuitous way you could imagine. And my buddy's kicking me into the table. He's like, dude, what is she? And I go, no, it's a misread. There's no way. She was being extra friendly. I'm like, maybe she's new and she thinks the service industry are supposed to flirt with people. I didn't know. Well, we finished our stuff, our food, and we're going to pay. And she goes, so what's your story? And I was like, I don't have one. I was like, I don't have one. And she's like, are you on Facebook? And I said, yeah. She's like, I'm going to friend you. And she's looking at my credit card receipt. I'm like, this is you? And I'm like, yeah. So my buddy and I walk out of there. He's like, what was that? And I go, I don't know. What was that? Well, later that night, she goes, meet me down at blah. And it was a place that was right around the corner from my house. And I was like, yeah, maybe. And my curiosity got the best of me. So I walk over there and I walk into this place that I would never normally go. It's got the worst music playing. It's a young bar scene. I'm not into it. So I go and I go, hello. And she introduced me to her friends, and she keeps looking at it like in this way. And I stood there kind of like, I said, hey, I think I'm just going to go. And she's like, oh, will you come outside and have a cigarette with me? And I was like, absolutely. That gets me out the door. So I'm standing there and she goes, I have drinks and stuff upstairs. I live right up that. And I go, oh, well, that's nice. And I looked into her eyes and I felt something so dark. And I said these exact words. I said, you got a couple extra layers in there. And I'm looking right at her eyes, and tears started coming down. And I go, and you don't like it at all, do you? She goes, no. And I said, and it's been there the whole time, hasn't it? She said, yes. And I go, all right, I'm going to do for you what I do to myself, because I went through a thing. And I stupidly, I had no business doing this. We went up to her apartment to get some privacy. Every wall in her house was filled with the most tormented artwork I've ever seen. And I'm like, did you do all this? And she's like, yeah. It was the darkest tortured soul type stuff I've ever seen. So I got her to grab some pillows and sit on the floor, and I went through this very intense clearing for her. And at one point, after the thing that I sort of dictated earlier in my clearing, which I applied to her, after the third time, she had convulsions, saliva coming out of her mouth, like literally exorcist level visuals. And she got up and she said, was crying, and she said, thank you, go. And she ran into her bedroom. So I tore down the stairs and I'm walking back. And Jeff, there were these black stingray looking archon things were swirling around my head. Now, it's one thing to clear yourself. If they're hovering about your world and you just block and you're like, no, not me, find someone else. But when you remove one from someone else and take their source out, I had no business doing that. I ended up having nightmares for about 2 weeks. I never have nightmares. And in some of these nightmares, I was the evil thing. That's never happened. So I did a lot of intense things. And from that point forward, I've never had a run in with any of those things again. But my cautionary tale to people would be like, if people just took away one little itty bitty thing from this, is no, you cannot be a part-time spiritual seeker and a part-time drinker of alcohol. Not even a little bit. You can't. I don't know what it is about alcohol, but it creates an enormous hole in your like etheric field. And it's just this instant little gateway for these things to come in. So I advise everyone to, you don't need any substances whatsoever to get where you're trying to go. And it took me a long time to really finally get that no amount of this type of stuff is going to work in my life.
You wrote a book about your experiences called I Keep Not Dying. What is the main takeaway someone should get from reading your book?
I think the main takeaway would be that not everyone on this planet, this beautiful planet called Earth, has a normal experience. And at the front end of the book, I postulate the idea that perhaps the experience I've been having on this planet was almost willed into being from myself, that I had something to do with these experiences, maybe before I came in, that I wanted these UFO experiences, spiritual attacks, even. Um, this is a lot of people believe this is a game in a spiritual school. If that is the case, it would feel to me that I put some of these impediments and these trials and tribulations out in front of me to beat them, to find ways over these hurdles. And so the book begins with my early life experiences and sightings and things like that, and goes into the period where I struggled a bunch with these entities, how I beat them, and just some philosophy and honestly some meditation techniques, and little hacks that work for everybody. And they're so much more simple than people think. You don't have to do long-winded, expensive courses on stuff. There are tiny little things we can do every single day to brighten ourselves. And so the book so far, I haven't spoken out about it too much. I haven't been on the circuit. I'm very shy. I'm a musician too, and I work a year on an album. And I'll go on Facebook and go, "Everybody, I did a thing. Okay, bye." And then I don't want to talk about myself. But I think it early returns with the way people have been giving me feedback is that it's a super page turner. Um, every word in this is true. It's exactly as it occurred to my sensibilities and my recollection, and it ends up in a really positive, sort of triumphant way. I think there's a lot of folks out there in our world right now who feel like they've hit a wall spiritually and they're battling with darkness. And I hope that the takeaway for those who read this is that, wow, there are these little nudges and repositions that can make a world of difference.
If people want to find out more about your book and your music, should they go to a website?
Yeah, there's a website for each of them. The music is at bengordonshow.bandcamp.com. I think there's 12 or 13 albums on there. It's very spiritual sounding music or poppy, late Beatles type of vibe, if you're into that. The website is called ikeepnotdying.com. And there is a contact form on there. I've begun doing some sessions for people, and so far, so good. I am not looking to get rich doing this. I will work with you. I will help for the least amount of money you can afford. And I'll probably just do a few a week. But I'm available to those who have questions or want to learn some meditation hacks and things like that. The book is on Amazon only at the moment. Um, I don't know the link to that, but if you type Ben Gordon, I Keep Not Dying, it pops up.
Ben, before we finish up, can you leave us with a last positive message?
My positive message is that I really, really think everything's going to be okay. There's a lot of darkness. There's a lot of noise out there. The television, the news, the internet uh, seems to be designed in a way to keep us out of our quietude, our connection to spirit. My message and hope for everyone is that things are a little bit better than they seem on the surface. And if you can, make some little moves in your life to let go of the internet for at least the first hour or two a day. Watch some comedy, make yourself laugh, meditate first, maybe set a goal that let's hold the internet off until after breakfast or something like this. Give your mind time to create the type of vibe that you would like from the center out. Then visit, maybe peek at what's going on and put it away. I think that's one of humanity's biggest issues right now is the addiction to digital devices. So finding creative ways to nudge that to the side, I think, is a big message that I like to say.
Ben, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
Thank you, Jeff. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.